Yay, we're back.
Yeah.
Woohoo. I hope you all had a nice Christmas break. We sure did. Olivia was here for Christmas with us, and then we traveled out to Seattle, so we got to see her twice, actually. So that was really nice. So if you remember, we left off with finishing the book of Revelation, and so we decided to go back to the Old Testament. And so we're going to do the book of Esther now. Esther is in the Old Testament, right? Kind of at the end of the historical books, before Job, after Ezra and Nehemiah. So right after First and Second Kings, First and Second Chronicles, then it goes Ezra, Nehemiah, and then Esther, just to kind of help you locate it. Or you can look it up in your table of contents and find out which page it's on. And we're just going to do chapter 1 this week as kind of an introductory thing. And I want to just give some kind of background or introductory information here. Before we kind of talk a little bit about chapter 1. We're not going to read it. Maybe just a few select passages or verses and stuff. So just to kind of help you place this in history, this story takes place at about the same time as Ezra and Nehemiah. So if you remember right, the kingdom of Israel, when Solomon was king, was a very large. And then after his death, it was split into two. So there was a northern kingdom and a southern kingdom. The northern kingdom was called Israel. The southern kingdom was called Judah. And you get the kind of the history of those in the First and Second Kings and in First and Second Chronicles. The book of Esther is written around 400 BC, and it's significant. This is where the Jewish people get the festival of Purim from. And we'll discuss that when we get to the end of the book, kind of where it's instituted. But that's a real celebratory festival. Like I said, we'll talk about it more when we get to that part. But I'm going to give you kind of a timeline here. So in 605, these are all years BC, the first Judeans, the southern kingdom, were, well, let me back up. In 722, the northern kingdom was taken over by Assyria. So in 605, then people of the southern kingdom were exiled to Babylon. Babylon came in and took over the southern kingdom. And so that first group of exiles would have included Daniel. If you remember back to when we did the study on the book of Daniel, would have included Daniel and his friends. And then in 587, the temple in Jerusalem was destroyed. In 538, so Babylon was eventually defeated by Persia, and Cyrus the Great, the king of Persia, in 538 decreed that the exiles in Babylon could return to Judah. And then in 536 is when Daniel had his final vision. And then Ezra and Nehemiah kind of tell us the story of the restoration of Jerusalem. And so they kind of rebuilt the temple, a smaller version of it. And that was completed in 516. And then in 478 is when we kind of see the events of actually chapter 2 of Esther. You hear the name, I'm not sure if I'm pronouncing it right, Ahasuerus. He also goes by Xerxes. He was the son of Darius the First, the grandson of Cyrus the Great.
Yep.
So that's when he married Esther, or Let's talk a little bit about Esther. Her kind of Persian name was Esther. Her Jewish name is Hadassah. So if you've ever read the book Hadassah or seen the movie, that kind of gives this story as well. And then yeah, so that's kind of what we're looking at. In 445, the walls of Jerusalem were restored. So some of the, go ahead.
Just to back up a little bit since you're jumping around. I did 2 commentaries this time for this. Both of them mentioned that for context, this chapter 1 occurs after Ezra had just returned to Jerusalem after it had been conquered by the Babylonians. And I didn't realize, but at this time, the Persian Empire covered Turkey, Iraq, Iran, Pakistan, Jordan, Lebanon, Israel, parts of modern day Egypt, Sudan, Libya, and Arabia.
Yeah, I'm
So
glad.
it was very, very large.
Yeah, it was a huge, a huge territory, I guess, a kingdom. Yeah, and you're right. Ezra is among those first exiles who goes back to Judah. So yeah. And that happens, of course, when Cyrus the Great releases some of them, says you can go back if you want. Of course, not all of them did. Some of them stayed in Persia, and Esther, of course, and the group of people that are talked about in the book of Esther are some among some of those who stayed. And interestingly enough, it's believed that the Magi who come to worship Jesus when he's born might have been a remnant of those Jewish people who stayed in Persia, because the Magi come from Persia, or Persia is actually now modern day Iran. Of course, not as large of a territory as what Olivia just named off, but yeah, it was a very large territory.
Because they give me the background behind the meaning of Esther's name as it pertains to Persia, which it technically both of mine said it means Venus, like as in the morning star,
Yep.
but to signify, like for the religious aspect, it would cast a ray of light forward into Israel's history from a dark time.
Right.
But it had there was a significant reason why her Persian name was Esther instead of Hadassah.
Right. And and in Persian, that name would have been pronounced Ishtar.
Okay.
Yeah.
Do you know why? So maybe you can answer my question, because my commentaries also said that Esther's the last of the historical books of the Bible.
Yes, she is. Yep.
Does that exactly mean?
So
Because Job right after Esther, so that to me makes sense.
yeah, so the Old Testament is divided into sections. There are the books of history, which go from Genesis through Esther, and then begins the books of wisdom, the books of wisdom or poetry, and that would include Job, Ecclesiastes, Song of Solomon, Psalms, Proverbs. I think I've named most of those.
Okay.
And then it goes into the prophets, both the major and minor prophets. Yeah. Like the New Testament is divided into books. We've got the Gospels, the Acts of the Apostles, and then we've got the letters. We've got letters of Paul, the minor letters, and then of course the book of Revelation. So it's kind of divisions, but yeah, Esther is the last of the history books.
No.
Yeah.
Sorry, there's a kitty going into my backpack.
Let me guess, it's Lee.
Yes.
She's so curious. All right, well, I'm gonna read just a little bit just to kind of get us kind of just and go ahead and read chapter 1 on your own, but I'm going to just kind of point out a few things here. The book of Esther starts off It says, this is what happened during the time of Xerxes. Some of your Bibles may have his, Xerxes is the Greek name. The Persian name is Ahasuerus.
I just refer to him as Xerxes because I could never.
Yeah,
I could.
Xerxes is easier to pronounce.
Yeah.
All right. The Xerxes who ruled over 127 provinces stretching from India to Kush. Kush, of course, is in Africa. So Olivia kind of listed off the countries that included. It was a very large territory.
Yeah.
At that time, King Xerxes reigned from his royal throne in the citadel of Susa. And in the 3rd year of his reign, he gave a banquet for all of his nobles and officials. The military leaders of Persia and Media, the princes and the nobles of the provinces were present. And so then we're told that that banquet goes on for 180 days, which is essentially 6 months. The commentary I was using said that this was probably a strategy meeting that he had because he was going to embark on trying to conquer Greece.
Greece.
And that,
Mine's a thing.
yeah,
So
yeah. So he hosts this very large banquet. I'm going to kind of summarize here what happens here. He's hosting this very large banquet / strategy meeting. So it's not a banquet that lasts for 6 months. Banquets, of course, figure prominently in the book of Esther. Major events or important events happen at banquets in the book of Esther. So, he's having anyway this big party, this strategy meeting. And finally, it gets to the point where I suppose they have their military strategy mapped out, and he invites even the commoners to come and join in this. Probably before they're going to embark on this major military thing.
So almost like it's a series of banquets. But in those days banquets, people traveled from all over. So it'd be realistic to say for 6 months those people stayed at the palace or near the palace for 6 months in order to do a series of banquets, because that would waste so much time if he just basically was like, hey, see you next week. That took a lot of time and energy for them to travel that far, and so it would have cost them a lot of money.
Right. Well, and the other thing is, he's trying to build up the argument, the case that he's making, to go against Greece, right? And so he's showing off all of his wealth and splendor and all of that kind of stuff, trying to kind of get everybody on board with what he's trying to do.
It takes a lot to bribe people. You can't do it in a month either, right. So you gotta take time.
Yeah. And so while this large gathering of people is taking place, we're told then that Xerxes' wife, Vashti, is hosting a banquet also for the women. And so that, of course, was common during that time. Men and women would eat separately. And so she's hosting the women, probably the wives and the noble women of this big gathering of people also. But it finally gets to the end, and it's in the last day, and there's a lot of drinking and in eating and indulging and everything that's going on. And Xerxes sends a message. He wants Vashti, his wife, brought into the great hall so that she can essentially be put on display, because she's a woman. We're told she's a woman of great beauty. And so he essentially wants to show her off. He wants to show off his wife. And so he sends word for her to come, and she refuses, which angers the king. It's interesting. I always have kind of mixed feelings when I read this part, because I kind of understand Vashti's refusal, right? Like, she more than likely doesn't want to come and just be a display, right? She doesn't want to come and be put on display. So she kind of stands up for herself. And says, no, I'm not going to do that. I'm not going to come there just so, all these drunken men can just, stare at me and all of this stuff. That's the only reason you want me there. But this sets off kind of the events now of the book. And her refusal then angers Xerxes, and he's not sure how to handle it. So he calls together his advisors and says, what should I do? And finally, one of them, Memucan, says, well, you got to do something. You got to be strong here, because otherwise all the women in the land are going to think that it's okay to disobey their husbands like this. So you have to make a bold move here, and you have to issue like an edict that this is what everybody's going to do. Look, not only am I doing this with Queen Vashti, but this is going to be the rule of the land for everybody in the Persian territories. And it's almost like Memucan kind of overreacts. He's afraid. He's like, if you allow her to get away with this, there's going to be like an uprising of women, and they won't listen to and obey their husbands. It's going to be horrible. They're going to be running amok and doing all sorts of things. And so the king divorces Vashti. He doesn't have her killed. He just puts her away. He essentially issues an edict of divorce and sends her away. And that's important too, because we'll kind of see this. She'll show up again, or she'll be mentioned again. I think at the end of the book, maybe, I can't remember, or it might be in one of the history books that are kind of collateral to this, but she's the mother of Artaxerxes, who takes over for King Xerxes, his son. She becomes a very valuable kind of counselor to her son. She gives him some good wisdom and guidance. So, and then this decree is issued that every man will be the master of his house. So when I was reading this, I thought, boy, that's kind of interesting that this, when we look at that region of the world, that's really kind of the way that they still operate, right? Women are subject to the men of the house. And that's kind of the rule of law. And it's, of course, a different faith tradition. This is long before Islam, of course. But that's the rule that Islamic law follows, that men are the boss and women are to be subject to the man of the house. So that scene now sets up really the rest of the book. It kind of gives us some history to go on. It might be interesting for you to, if you're interested in kind of getting a sense of history and what's going on at this time, to read Ezra and Nehemiah. That'll give you kind of an idea on what's happening like back home during this time. The other thing that you'll notice here as we read this book is that God is not mentioned directly in this book. He's referred to kind of indirectly in chapter 4. And it's evident that God's in control of all of this. This is really a story of God's deliverance of his people, because there will be a threat that will come against his people, against the Jewish people. And so God is working through the human drama that's going on in this book, and that's kind of always under the surface here, but he's never mentioned directly in this book. So that's kind of an interesting fact to know about the book. But know this, that God is in control of this situation and is guiding and directing this. And this really then becomes a story of deliverance and kind of points forward then to the ultimate deliverance that God will give his people. You have any other thoughts or things that you discovered in your commentaries?
Well, I have many thoughts
Okay.
in general. No, I actually have specific thoughts for these. Just that I wanted it noted, especially because my exact first thought was, why wouldn't she just appear? But then I read on, so don't comment. One of the arguments in both of my commentaries listed is whether or not the expectation was for Vashti to show up basically nude so that all could gaze upon her beauty. Because the argument was between the men of who had the most beautiful women, basically, and they were all drunk. They pretty much flat out say they were all drunk.
Yeah.
I mean, drinking all the time. So for Xerxes to be drunk, to be like, let's send my woman out here.
Yeah.
Because, I mean, because he had the power to do so. I don't know why she didn't. I don't know why she didn't just go out, but still clothed. That makes no sense to me. We're never going to know that, blah, blah, blah. But something I think I found interesting was that in a lot of the description, so if you guys actually read, the descriptions are very clearly written from a man, is what my commentary says, because they don't go into detail that much about how everything looks. Like, they give a few here and there, but essentially it's kind of like, oh, the place looked pretty.
Yeah.
So it's like, here's your, basically he was just showing off his wealth as a sign of pride. It wrote, mine was like, if you want an example, reference back to Matthew chapter 20, verse 25. There's something there about men's pride, how they have to show off their great wealth, especially as kings, in order to prove their power, essentially, which is so dumb.
Interestingly enough, your comment about this is written from a man's perspective. When I was researching on this, we don't know who the author is, although a lot of the commentators believe that the author could be Mordecai, who was Esther's uncle or cousin, however he's related to her. And that would make sense, because then he would have knowledge of a lot of the really important details, but probably not the finer details. Make attention.
Yeah, I mean, he would have been at the banquets, all of them, no matter what. So
Mordecai would not have been, only maybe at the one for the commoners. But remember, Mordecai and Esther or Hadassah are Jewish, so they would not have intermingled much with them. That's why
I thought the job he had would involve him being at the palace.
Yeah, no, he doesn't get that job until later.
Oh, that's right.
Yeah. You can tell I've read the book. Yeah.
My bad. I have read this book before. I guess I read through this multiple times. Another thought that I came up with later was kind of like, I'm guessing it's because he was drunk, but also, like, why would he ask his advisors what the law is? Because when you're prepared to be ruler of a kingdom, you have to know the law, basically. So he should have known what the right course of action to do was. I don't know why he would bother asking his advisors, unless he's just giving his advisors something to do and they weren't as drunk as him.
Yeah, or
the world will never know.
Yeah, maybe he didn't know all the finer details of the law. I mean, that's why you have your advisors, right? So you don't have to muddy your mind with all of the fine details of running the kingdom. So, yeah.
But something I came across in both commentaries that I thought was super important, and because it's referencing back to what happened at this time period of like, wives, you should obey your husbands. But it mentions that Xerxes should have honored the dignity of Queen Vashti rather than listening to his advisor's advice, because the goal, the outcome that Xerxes wanted was admirable, because it speaks to the need within every man to sense respect and honor from his wife, because a wife's respect is the most precious gift she can give her husband, but not in a way that's demeaning or would cause her to sin, basically.
Right.
Like, wives, you should obey your husbands, and she should have appeared before him, but it should have been done with respect and honor. And it, like, he shouldn't have even asked in the first place.
And perhaps that's why Vashti doesn't come, is because she felt the dishonor and the shame attached with it. I
Well,
don't.
because I'm almost 100% sure she would have had to appear naked.
Yeah,
So
I'm
it's
not told.
like,
We're guessing there. So
I just feel so sure about that, and that's because that can feel like the most disrespectful thing to do.
yeah.
Come in front of a room full of thousands of people naked so they can see how beautiful you are. Like, that's just so respectful. And I think I had it pulled up for Ephesians 5:33. And I went back. Which says blah 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 blah. Scroll down. Sorry, it says, however, each one of you also must love his wife as he loves himself, and the wife must respect her husband.
Yeah.
So it's supposed to be neutral.
Exactly. And that particular passage that Paul's writing about in Ephesians, when it's talking about marriage, also says, if you look further up, husbands are to love their wives as Christ loved the church.
Yep.
Yeah. So you're right. There's a mutual respect and admiration and things that go on in that marriage relationship.
Well, because even today, you should have mutual respect for your partner, and it should go both ways.
Right.
Otherwise, that's how you end up with people in relationships where one cheats on the other. This is just my personal opinion. If you truly don't respect your partner, then cheating on them is a very easy thing to do.
Right.
If you have no regard for their self-respect, basically. And so it just, it is what it is, but it's definitely important here during this time.
Yeah.
And he didn't have the common sense to understand that, because if he did, he wouldn't have asked in the first place.
Right.
But it was God intended, because otherwise Esther would never have ruled.
Exactly. And so I think that's the thing that's important about chapter 1. Chapter 1 really sets the stage for the rest of the book. Without chapter 1, nothing else would have happened. And, chapter 1 kind of sets the stage to avert a large crisis here. We also see Xerxes change, and we'll see that as we go through the book, because his relationship with Esther is different. It seems that maybe Xerxes learns a lesson through all this. So his ability to respect his wife and stuff changes throughout the course of the book. And we'll see that as we move through this.
Which is probably why Queen Vashti returns later on.
Maybe, yeah.
I mean, for all we know, he could have realized his mistake and reached out to her, or he purposely made his son Artaxerxes the heir rather than, because him and Esther had children.
I don't know if they do or not. We're not told. Artaxerxes, of course, is the firstborn, so he is the heir. And I don't remember if Vashti is mentioned in the book of Esther again, or like I said, it could have been in one of there's histories that are written of the time period that kind of corroborate a lot of.
So we know that she returns.
Yes.
she would have done that with ill will, because you learn how to rule from your father. So
Right.
like it wouldn't she wouldn't have been allowed back if he would have been like, your brother's terrible. Like, you
Yeah.
know, because then what ends up happening is the kid adopts the feelings and thinkings and opinions of their father in order to learn to rule the kingdom.
Right.
And slowly do they figure out, oh, this is how it should be. Which is what he figures out in the book of Esther, because Esther is wise and kind and gracious and shows him, like, hey,
Yeah.
respect your wife. And I will
All
respect you.
right. So Olivia and I have given you a lot of things to consider as we begin this great book. I hope that you look forward to studying it as much as we do. It's been a while since I've read it, so I'm looking forward to digging in a little bit deeper here to the story. And I hope that you will continue to join us. Next week, we'll be on chapter 2, and we'll just kind of work our way through the book again. So let's close our time together with prayer. Gracious God, we are thankful that your hand is on history and that you guide and direct everything that goes on around us, even though sometimes we have a difficult time seeing you at work. We ask that you be with us as we continue to go forward from here. Guide and direct our lives so that we can serve you in the best way possible. We ask this in Jesus' holy and precious name. Amen. All right, thanks for joining us. We are excited to be back, and we'll look forward to seeing you again next week on Wednesday. Have a
Yay.
good week.
Bye.
Bye.